Introduction: Why this isn't a book about poker. Life is fundamentally uncertain. We move through our days making choices, navigating a world filled with hidden information and unpredictable outcomes, yet we desperately crave certainty. We want reality to make sense, to follow a strict set of rules where good decisions automatically guarantee good results and bad decisions guarantee failure. But the world does not operate on the clean, mathematically perfect lines of a chessboard where every piece is visible and every move has a calculable countermove. Instead, the decisions we make are, at their core, wagers placed against the unknown. We are constantly betting our time, our money, our emotional energy, and our futures on situations where we do not have all the facts. When we accept this fundamental truth, we stop looking at life as a puzzle to be perfectly solved and start seeing it as a landscape of probabilities to be skillfully navigated. To understand this landscape, one must look away from traditional business environments or predictable academic halls and turn toward arenas defined by extreme risk and incomplete information. The mindset required to survive and thrive when real capital is on the line reveals a profound truth about human decision-making. We are deeply flawed in how we evaluate our own choices. There is a severe misattribution of cause and effect that plagues almost every human mind. We suffer from an ingrained habit of looking at the final outcome of a situation and using that outcome to judge the quality of the decision that led us there. If the result is favorable, we immediately pat ourselves on the back, praising our own intellect and strategic genius. If the result is disastrous, we assume the decision itself must have been terrible. This deeply rooted cognitive trap strips away the nuance of reality. It completely ignores the invisible hand of luck, variance, and the vast array of unknown factors that stand between our initial choices and the final results. By tying our self-worth and our intellectual validation strictly to what happens after the fact, we blind ourselves to the actual quality of our thinking process. We punish ourselves for making the mathematically correct choice simply because luck did not break our way, and we reward ourselves for foolish risks simply because we happen to survive them. This leads directly into another pervasive illusion that clouds our judgment. Once an event has occurred, our minds immediately go to work rewriting history. We look backward from the present moment and convince ourselves that the outcome was inevitable all along. The clues, we tell ourselves, were incredibly obvious. The disaster was entirely predictable, or the triumph was practically guaranteed. This backward-looking lens artificially inflates our sense of control over the world. It makes a chaotic, unpredictable reality seem orderly and manageable. But this is a comforting lie. Before the event unfolded, the future was a wide spectrum of possibilities, many of them contradictory. By tricking ourselves into believing we knew exactly what was going to happen, we destroy our ability to learn from the genuine uncertainty we faced in the moment. We fail to recognize how much we truly did not know, and therefore we fail to prepare for the inevitable unknowns of tomorrow. To break free from these comfortable but dangerous cognitive traps, a radical shift in how we process experience is required. The goal of a strategic mind is no longer to simply act, react, and hope for the best, but to create a continuous, deliberate mechanism for improvement. This requires us to forcefully detach our ego from the outcome and focus relentlessly on the quality of our decision-making process. It involves making a choice, observing the result without immediate emotional judgment, actively searching for the exact role that luck and hidden information played, and feeding those honest observations back into our mental models. It is a rigorous, ongoing cycle of self-correction. True mastery in decision-making does not come from the impossible goal of being right every time. It comes from building a resilient, honest system that extracts wisdom from both victories and defeats, slowly refining our ability to weigh probabilities in a world that refuses to give us all the answers. Chapter 1. Life is poker, not chess. When we examine the architecture of human decision-making, we often operate under a dangerous delusion about the type of game we are actually playing. We are conditioned to seek order, to look for clear lines of cause and effect, and to believe that if we are smart enough and work hard enough, we can calculate our way to guaranteed success. We approach our careers, our relationships, and our major life choices as if we are sitting down at a board where all the pieces are visible and the rules are rigidly defined. But the mechanics of reality do not support this illusion. To understand why we make mistakes, and more importantly, why we judge ourselves so harshly for those mistakes, we must confront a fundamental mismatch between the theoretical games we construct in our minds and the chaotic, unpredictable arena of real life. Consider the ancient and revered game of chess. It is universally upheld as the ultimate test of strategic brilliance and intellectual superiority. Yet fundamentally, chess contains no hidden information and involves zero elements of luck. The pieces are placed in plain sight on a 64-square grid. There are no dice to roll, no cards to draw, and no secret agendas hidden by your opponent. Every possible move, while complex and deeply branching, is entirely knowable. If you lose a game of chess, you cannot blame the wind, the referee, or a bad bounce. You lost because your opponent made better calculations, saw further down the decision tree, or capitalized on a strategic flaw in your logic. It is a closed system of perfect information. Because of this, it is incredibly tempting to map the rules of chess onto our daily lives. We want to believe that if we just think a few steps ahead, we can outmaneuver the universe. But treating life like a solvable puzzle of perfect information is a recipe for deep psychological anguish. When we inevitably face failure in a world we treat like a chessboard, we are forced to conclude that we simply weren't smart enough. The true nature of our existence is vastly different. It is not played on a visible grid, but rather mirrors the dynamics of poker. Poker is an entirely different beast, defined by its hidden elements and the persistent, undeniable presence of luck. You are dealt cards you did not choose. Your opponents hold information they actively conceal, and no matter how perfectly you calculate the odds, a single turn of a card can destroy a mathematically flawless strategy. In poker, it is entirely possible to make the absolute best decision based on all available information, execute it with perfect discipline, and still lose everything on the table to an opponent who made a reckless, foolish choice but simply got lucky. This is the profound truth of human existence. We are constantly forced to place wagers on the future using fragmented data, obscured facts, and educated guesses. Separating the quality of our decisions from the influence of luck is the central challenge of navigating a probabilistic world. When we fail to recognize this distinction, we fall back into the devastating cognitive trap of judging our choices solely by their conclusions. This phenomenon of drawing a straight, unbreakable line between a result and the decision that preceded it corrupts our ability to learn. In a world of perfect information, an outcome is a reliable indicator of skill. In a world of hidden information and variance, it is a distorted mirror. If we blindly praise ourselves for successes born of sheer luck, we reinforce reckless behavior. Conversely, if we relentlessly punish ourselves for failures that occurred despite executing a highly logical strategy, we destroy our confidence and abandon sound methodologies. We end up altering our behavior based on the whims of chance, rather than the merit of our reasoning. Perhaps no event in modern public memory illustrates this cognitive distortion more violently than the final moments of Super Bowl silhouette. The scenario is etched into the minds of millions. A championship on the line, mere seconds remaining, the ball resting agonizingly close to the goal line. The conventional wisdom, the overwhelming public consensus, dictated that the team should rely on their star running back to power through the defense. Instead, a pass was called. The ball was intercepted, the championship was lost, and the immediate, deafening reaction from analysts, fans, and media alike was that it was the single worst play call in the history of the sport. The judgment was swift, absolute, and entirely driven by the catastrophic result. However, a cold, emotionless analysis of the underlying probabilities reveals a drastically different reality. Given the precise time left on the clock, the specific number of timeouts remaining, and the defensive personnel on the field, the strategic options were highly constrained. Running the ball and failing would burn precious time, potentially leaving the team with only one more chaotic attempt. Throwing a pass, particularly a short, specific route with a historically microscopic interception rate, offered a strategic masterstroke. If the pass was incomplete, the clock stopped, preserving time for two more definitive rushing attempts. The decision to pass was mathematically sound, maximizing the total number of chances the team had to score. The interception was an incredibly low probability anomaly, a lightning strike of bad luck at the worst possible moment. Yet, because the outcome was disastrous, the world collectively abandoned statistical logic and condemned the decision-maker. This is the ultimate danger of ignoring the poker-like nature of reality. We publicly execute brilliant strategy because we refuse to acknowledge the power of variance. Accepting this truth requires an immense psychological toll. Our brains fiercely resist ambiguity. We are evolutionarily wired to spot patterns, to find certainty in the rustling bushes, and to create narratives that make us feel secure and in control. Acknowledging that our lives are heavily dictated by elements completely outside our influence feels terrifying. It requires us to abandon the comforting lie that the universe operates as a strict meritocracy. It demands that we sit with the deeply uncomfortable realization that we can do everything right and still fail, or do everything wrong and still succeed. Rewiring our minds to handle this uncertainty is not a natural process. It is a grueling, deliberate act of intellectual discipline. Yet pushing through this discomfort unlocks a profound evolutionary advantage. When we finally stop fighting the inherent uncertainty of life and begin to embrace it, the very nature of our struggle transforms. Uncertainty ceases to be a terrifying monster lurking in the shadows and instead becomes the raw material of opportunity. By detaching our ego from the uncontrollable outcomes, we free up immense cognitive energy to focus strictly on what we can control, the rigorous, honest evaluation of our choices. We stop demanding guarantees from a universe that cannot provide them, and we start thinking in terms of expected value, managing risk, and cultivating resilience. The illusion of perfect control is a heavy burden to carry. Dropping it allows us to navigate the fog of reality not with blind faith or rigid dogmas, but with the sharp, adaptable mind of a true strategist. Chapter 2. Wanna Bet? To fully internalize the reality that life mirrors a game of hidden information, we must radically expand our definition of what constitutes a wager. When we hear the word, we naturally visualize crowded casinos, flashing lights, and chips pushed across green felt. But the mechanics of wagering are woven into the very fabric of our daily existence. Whenever we make a choice, we are effectively placing chips on the table. We commit our finite resources, our time, our capital, our emotional bandwidth, and our physical health on a specific vision of the future, hoping the return will be greater than the investment. Choosing a career path, selecting a life partner, or even deciding whether to move across the country are all massive wagers placed against the unknown probabilities of tomorrow. Yet, in this lifelong casino, we are rarely sitting across the table from a hostile opponent. While we occasionally compete directly with others, the overwhelming majority of the stakes we risk are placed in a quiet, solitary game. The true opponent is the alternative version of our own lives. When we choose a specific trajectory, we are actively betting against all the other paths we could have taken. The wager is defined by opportunity cost. If we decide to spend our evening studying a new skill rather than relaxing, we are betting that the future dividends of that knowledge will outweigh the immediate sacrifice of comfort. Every decision is a declaration that the chosen option holds a higher expected value than the abandoned alternatives, making our future selves the ultimate beneficiaries or victims of our current calculations. The foundation upon which we place every single one of these wagers is our internal framework of understanding the world. This belief engine acts as a deeply embedded, invisible machinery, driving our choices based on what we hold to be true. If our underlying assumptions about reality are accurate, our wagers will generally yield positive results over time. However, if this internal machinery is built on faulty assumptions, our decisions will consistently pull us toward failure, regardless of how meticulously we plan. Therefore, the absolute most critical component of navigating a probabilistic world is understanding exactly how this machinery operates. Our fundamental understanding of how we acquire knowledge is dangerously flawed. We like to imagine ourselves as logical, objective processors of information. The idealized model suggests that we encounter a new piece of data. We rigorously evaluate its validity, we weigh the evidence, and only then do we construct a belief around it. The chilling reality of human psychology, however, operates in the exact reverse. From an evolutionary standpoint, survival required rapid processing, not deep philosophical inquiry. Consequently, our brains are wired to instantly absorb information and accept it as truth. We hear something, we believe it immediately, and only later, and only if we are forced by external pressure or deliberate effort, do we actually pause to verify its accuracy. Our minds are not fortified castles defending against falsehoods. They are porous sponges, soaking up the narratives of our environment without resistance. Once an idea takes root in our minds, it ceases to be mere information and morphs into a fundamental piece of our identity. At this stage, our cognitive architecture shifts from information gathering to fierce self-preservation, revealing a dark truth about our motivations. This introduces a profound distortion in how we process reality. We do not objectively evaluate new data to test our existing frameworks. Instead, we engage in deeply motivated reasoning. We become relentless lawyers defending a predetermined verdict. We actively hunt for any shred of evidence that validates what we already believe, elevating flimsy anecdotes to absolute proof. Simultaneously, we aggressively dismantle, ignore, or outright reject mountains of empirical data that contradict our worldview. Our primary motivation is rarely the pursuit of objective truth. It is the overwhelming psychological need to feel smart, validated, and insulated from the painful sting of being wrong. Breaking this cycle of self-deception requires a radical act of cognitive rebellion. We must dismantle the societal conditioning that equates certainty with strength. In business, politics, and daily life, admitting ignorance is routinely punished, viewed as a signal of incompetence or weak leadership. Yet, in a universe governed by probability, absolute certainty is not a virtue. It is an illusion and a profound liability. The most potent tool we can inject into our decision-making process is the deliberate, conscious embrace of, "I'm not sure." This simple phrase acts as a circuit breaker. It halts the defensive reflex that immediately protects our ego and opens a vital window for genuine inquiry. It is the necessary preamble to updating our internal models, allowing us to pivot away from false assumptions before they bankrupt our future. This paradigm shift forces us to completely redefine confidence. Traditional confidence is binary. It demands we are either entirely right or entirely wrong. This fragile architecture shatters the moment contradictory evidence appears. True, resilient confidence in a probabilistic world is expressed through continuous calibration. It is the ability to step back and estimate that we are perhaps 70% confident that a specific action will succeed, consciously leaving a 30% margin for error, luck, and unknown variables. By thinking in ranges and percentages, we untether our self-worth from the impossible standard of perfection. When new, conflicting data arrives, it is no longer an attack on our intelligence. It is simply an input used to adjust the dial from 70% to 55%. This fluidity transforms us from rigid ideologues defending a fragile ego into adaptable, truth-seeking strategists capable of navigating the murky waters of reality with grace and precision. Chapter 3. Bet to Learn. Fielding the data. The moment a decision leaves our hands and enters the physical world, it ceases to be a mere calculation and transforms into a result. The dice stop rolling, the cards are flipped, the market fluctuates, and reality delivers a verdict. This transition point is where the true test of a strategic mind begins. We assume that living through these events naturally makes us wiser, that simply accumulating years on this earth guarantees an accumulation of insight. But navigating a probabilistic universe requires far more than passive observation. To truly evolve, we must extract the raw, unpolished lessons from the chaotic aftermath of our choices. We must learn how to catch the feedback the world throws at us, dissect it with surgical precision, and feed it back into our internal belief engine. When reality delivers an outcome, we rarely treat it as cold, objective information. A result is never just a sterile data point plotted on a graph. It arrives heavily burdened with emotional weight. It feels profoundly personal. In the immediate aftermath of a wager, the human mind does not calmly categorize the event as a mathematical probability materializing. Instead, we interpret the outcome as a direct referendum on our intelligence, our worth, and our identity. The data does not simply inform us. It strikes at our ego. A financial loss or a failed project feels like a humiliating indictment of our reasoning, while an unexpected triumph feels like a glorious coronation. Because we attach such intense emotional gravity to the final score, our ability to objectively analyze how we arrived at that score is immediately compromised. The raw data of our lives is instantly corrupted by the fragile nature of human pride. To protect this fragility, our cognitive architecture deploys a powerful and deeply ingrained defense mechanism. As we sort through the chaotic outcomes of our daily wagers, we relentlessly filter the results to preserve our self-image. When a decision yields a positive result, we immediately seize ownership of it. We construct elaborate narratives explaining how our unique foresight, our relentless work ethic, and our superior intellect forged the victory. The triumph was inevitable, we tell ourselves, because we orchestrated it flawlessly. However, when a decision ends in disaster, our internal narrative aggressively shifts the blame outward. The failure was an anomaly, an unpredictable act of God, a malicious twist of fate, or the fault of an incompetent colleague. The loss had nothing to do with our strategy. We were simply victims of terrible luck. This asymmetrical sorting of reality ensures that our ego remains utterly protected, but it guarantees that our internal maps of the world remain violently distorted. This psychological trap shatters one of society's most cherished adages. We are constantly told that mere exposure to the world will naturally forge us into wiser individuals. But this is a dangerous fallacy. Accumulating years of life does not automatically equate to accumulating wisdom. If an individual spends 20 years feeding the results of their choices through the distorted lens of an unchecked ego, taking credit for every lucky break and blaming the universe for every strategic failure, they have not gained 20 years of experience. They have merely repeated a single year of deeply flawed processing 20 times over. The sheer volume of outcomes we experience is entirely irrelevant if our mechanism for digesting those outcomes is broken. Without a deliberate, agonizingly honest method for analyzing our history, the passage of time only serves to cement our delusions, hardening bad habits into unbreakable routines. The ultimate danger in this flawed processing does not actually reside in failure. Failure, for all its painful sting, sometimes forces a reckoning. The most lethal poison to a developing strategic mind is a completely different phenomenon, a magnificent triumph built on terrible logic. When we make a reckless, mathematically disastrous decision and happen to be rescued by blind luck, the universe hands us a catastrophic illusion. The positive outcome floods our brain with dopamine, vigorously reinforcing the very cognitive flaws that should have destroyed us. We begin to mistake foolish risks for brilliant intuition. This creates a ticking time bomb. The universe's variance will inevitably balance out, and when we apply that same terrible, positively reinforced logic to a future wager, the resulting collapse will be devastating. A lucky win that validates a bad process is far more destructive to long-term survival than a harsh loss that corrects one. To break free from this cycle of self-deception, we must perform a radical shift in perspective. We must learn to detach ourselves from the subjective center of our own narrative. When we watch other people navigate their lives, our cognitive biases operate in the exact reverse of how we judge ourselves. If a rival succeeds, we quickly dismiss their victory as sheer luck or an unfair advantage. If they fail, we confidently declare that it was the natural result of their glaring incompetence. We are incredibly harsh, unyielding critics of the external world, yet blindly compassionate toward our own missteps. The mastery of learning requires us to drag our own decisions out into the cold light of this external perspective. We must learn to stand on the sidelines of our own minds, ruthlessly auditing our choices as if they were made by a stranger. We must apply the same skepticism to our own brilliant victories as we do to the triumphs of our rivals, stripping away the emotional armor to see the naked mechanics beneath. The final evolution of this process demands a complete and total severing of the link between the final score and the quality of the wager. The objective is to rewind the tape to the exact moment the decision was made, violently ignoring everything that happened afterward. What did we know at that exact second? What crucial information was hidden from us? Did we accurately weigh the probabilities, or did we let emotion hijack the wheel? By dissecting the architecture of the decision before the universe had a chance to impose its random variance, we finally begin to learn. The true measure of a strategist is the ability to look at a devastating loss, analyze the underlying mathematics, and calmly declare that they would make the exact same bet again tomorrow. It is the profound realization that controlling the outcome is an impossible dream, but refining the process is the ultimate source of power. 4. The buddy system. Even with the most rigorous intellectual discipline, attempting to dismantle our own cognitive biases in total isolation is a nearly impossible endeavor. The human brain is a master of self-deception, constantly working in the background to protect our fragile egos and justify our past wages. We cannot consistently play the objective referee in a game where our own self-worth is on the line. To truly break the cycle of flawed reasoning, we require an external mirror that refuses to distort reality for our comfort. We must step outside the solitary confinement of our own minds and forge an alliance. The strategic thinker recognizes that building a carefully curated collective, a dedicated group committed to the same relentless pursuit of objective truth, is the ultimate safeguard against self-sabotage. However, simply gathering a random assortment of friends or colleagues is insufficient and often counterproductive. Most traditional social circles operate under an unspoken, subconscious contract of mutual emotional protection. To serve as a highly tuned diagnostic instrument for evaluating life's wages, this collective must establish a radically different environment. The group must operate under a strict and unconventional social contract specifically engineered to dismantle the ego. This requires laying down foundational ground rules where the ultimate objective is universally understood, creating an intellectual sanctuary where hard, uncomfortable truths are actively protected from the natural human reflex of emotional backlash. In standard societal interactions, when an individual details a painful failure or a streak of bad luck, the reflexive response from peers is sympathy and unwavering validation. We rush to assure our friends that their logic was flawless and that the universe simply treated them unfairly. A specialized truth-seeking pod must ruthlessly eradicate this reflex. The currency of this elite collective is not comfort, it is absolute accuracy. Every member must internalize the concept that the highest form of compassion is not blindly validating a flawed belief, but surgically dismantling it before it causes further harm. The group collectively agrees to prioritize an agonizingly honest assessment of reality over the fleeting warmth of emotional affirmation. This unyielding pursuit of accuracy is firmly anchored by the powerful force of accountability. When we operate entirely on our own, it is incredibly easy to quietly abandon our strategic frameworks the moment a decision becomes difficult or emotionally taxing. We quickly forgive our own lapses in logic and sweep our cognitive errors under the rug. But when we know our wages will eventually be dissected by a group of respected peers, our behavior fundamentally shifts. The mere anticipation of having to explain our reasoning out loud forces us to process information with far greater care in real time. Accountability serves as a preemptive strike against sloppy thinking, compelling us to execute our strategies diligently, simply because we know our logic will soon be placed on the examining table. To ensure this examination is comprehensive, the architecture of the group must be built on a foundation of diverse perspectives. A pod composed of individuals who share identical backgrounds, identical experiences, and identical worldviews is nothing more than a solitary echo chamber amplified. To effectively map the massive terrain of hidden information surrounding any wager, the collective must utilize a rich variety of lenses. The inherent blind spots of one member must be immediately obvious to another. By intentionally colliding differing viewpoints, the group aggregates a much wider spectrum of data and prevents the lethal trap of groupthink, ensuring every decision is rigorously tested against multiple interpretations of reality before it is finalized. To govern the functional mechanics of this intellectual collision, the most effective blueprint is borrowed directly from the scientific community, a system explicitly designed to strip human bias from observation. This framework rests on 4 vital pillars. The first requires the communal sharing of data. All information, whether it supports or shatters a desired narrative, belongs to the entire group, preventing anyone from hiding facts to protect their ego. The second pillar mandates universalism. The validity of any claim must be judged entirely independent of the person making it, destroying the dangerous tendency to blindly trust the charismatic or dismiss the inexperienced. The third pillar demands disinterestedness. The collective must evaluate the mechanics of a choice without knowing the final outcome or the emotional stakes involved, forcing an unbiased audit of the process itself. Finally, the group operates on a foundation of organized skepticism. Every premise, no matter how sacred, is automatically treated as a fragile hypothesis demanding immediate testing rather than a gospel truth. To prevent this intense level of organized skepticism from deteriorating into perceived personal attacks, the collective must formalize the act of disagreement. By explicitly assigning the role of the contrarian, the group entirely removes the social friction from dissent. When a specific individual is actively tasked with finding the absolute strongest argument against a proposed wager, it is no longer an attack on the person proposing the idea. It becomes a vital, required function of the system. This relentless, manufactured search for counter-evidence forces the collective to stare directly into the hidden weaknesses of their own logic, transforming intellectual conflict from an emotional hazard into the ultimate tool for strategic calibration. Chapter 5. Adventures in Mind Traveling. The human mind is chronically imprisoned in the immediate present. When confronted with a high-stakes choice, our neurological architecture overwhelmingly biases the immediate emotional impact, blinding us to the long-term consequences of our actions. The pain of a sudden loss or the thrill of an immediate reward dominates our sensory input, causing us to lose all rational perspective. To become elite decision-makers in a probabilistic world, we must develop the cognitive ability to unmoor ourselves from the current moment. We must learn the deliberate art of mind traveling, consciously shifting our perspective through time to view our wagers from the vantage point of our future selves. This temporal flexibility is the ultimate mechanism for breaking the tyranny of the present emotion. The most immediate weapon against the distorting lens of the present is a deliberate, structured expansion of our temporal horizon. When a decision incites a surge of anxiety, fear, or overwhelming temptation, we are almost exclusively reacting to the short-term fallout. By forcing our minds to evaluate the consequence of the wager across shifting timeframes, specifically asking how we will feel about the choice 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years from now, we systematically shatter the illusion of immediate disaster. A setback or a rejected proposal that feels utterly catastrophic in the next 10 minutes will often register as a minor, manageable obstacle on the 10-month radar and entirely vanish into irrelevance on the 10-year timeline. This mental time travel recalibrates our emotional response. It prevents us from making terrible, reactionary decisions or sacrificing immense future value simply to avoid a brief moment of present discomfort. While looking forward helps mitigate present emotion, looking backward from an imagined future offers a profound, almost unfair strategic advantage. Human beings are naturally infected with a pervasive optimism bias. When we launch a new project or place a significant bet, our minds automatically sketch out futures where our wagers execute perfectly and the universe cooperates with our plans. To counter this dangerous naivety, we must perform a radical mental exercise. We project ourselves into a specific point in the future, and we declare as an absolute fact that our endeavor has ended in complete, undeniable catastrophe. From this vantage point of guaranteed failure, we force our minds to look backward and construct the precise narrative of our destruction. What exact missteps occurred, which ignored warnings materialized, what resources ran dry. This reverse engineering of disaster heavily bypasses our defensive ego, allowing us to identify fatal vulnerabilities and blind spots in our current strategy that our natural optimism actively hides from us. This temporal manipulation is equally vital for mapping the actual terrain of victory. Simply dreaming of a successful outcome provides no navigational utility. Hope is not a valid strategy. Instead, we must transport our minds to a future where our ultimate goal has already been achieved in spectacular fashion. From that summit of guaranteed success, we trace the steps backward down the mountain to the present day. What specific alliances were forged along the way? What key milestones had to be cleared to reach the peak? By constructing a timeline anchored in an established future victory, we build a concrete, executable roadmap. It forces us to confront the actual, grueling steps required to win, transforming a vague, aspirational wish into a sequence of calculated, actionable wagers. A critical byproduct of this continuous mental time travel is the deliberate manipulation of regret. Usually, regret is a useless, punishing emotion that arrives entirely too late, long after the dice have settled and the capital is permanently lost. It is simply the painful realization of what we should have done. But by actively placing our minds in the future and vividly simulating the exact emotional devastation of a failed wager before we even make the move, we can summon the phantom pain of regret on demand. We drag the future suffering into the present moment. This anticipatory regret acts as a powerful, visceral deterrent. It aggressively interrupts the reckless momentum of a bad bet, utilizing the sharp sting of a simulated failure to protect our real-world resources and force a re-evaluation of the odds. Mastering these temporal mechanics is critical because the alternative is surrendering to the most destructive psychological force in any probabilistic endeavor, the total emotional hijacking known as tilt. When a series of wagers yields painful results, regardless of whether the initial logic was mathematically sound, the rational machinery of the brain begins to violently shut down. Frustration, anger, and the desperate, burning need to immediately recover lost ground seize control of the cognitive steering wheel. In this highly volatile state, an individual is no longer calculating expected value or utilizing time travel. They are trapped in a furious present, blindly throwing capital at the universe in a desperate plea to be made whole. The seasoned strategist recognizes that the human mind is utterly compromised while on tilt. The ultimate defense is not the illusion that we can fight the emotion in the heat of the moment, but the discipline to have established absolute, unbreakable protocols beforehand. We must build psychological tripwires that automatically force us to step away from the table the moment our temporal perspective collapses and the rage of the present takes over. Chapter 6. Reckoning with the Future. As we stand at the precipice of any major decision, the future stretches out before us not as a single paved road, but as a dense and branching forest of possibilities. The human mind naturally craves a definitive map, demanding to know exactly which path reality will ultimately take. However, forcing the future into a single, predictable narrative is a dangerous illusion. To navigate the unknown with true strategic depth, we must abandon the futile attempt to predict the one exact outcome and instead master the art of scenario planning. This discipline requires us to systematically map out the various ways a situation could unfold, acknowledging that our chosen wager will interact with a volatile universe. By rigorously anticipating a multitude of outcomes, ranging from spectacular success to absolute catastrophe, along with the vast, muddy middle ground, we cease to be blind victims of circumstance. We become prepared architects, ready to deploy calculated responses regardless of which branch of the future reality decides to illuminate. This shift in perspective demands that we stop treating the future as a binary construct where things either happen or they do not. The reality we are stepping into is a wide, continuous spectrum. Recognizing the range of possible futures forces us to assign probabilities to different scenarios rather than clinging to absolute certainties. When we map out this spectrum, we realize that every choice carries a distribution of potential results. A well-reasoned decision might still carry a 20% chance of failure, while a reckless one might somehow hold a 5% chance of a lucky victory. By visualizing this full distribution, we immunize ourselves against the shock of unexpected results. If a negative outcome materializes, it does not shatter our worldview because we had already reserved a designated space for it on our probabilistic map. We understand that the universe simply rolled the dice and landed on a less likely but previously identified section of the spectrum. In this endeavor to map the unknown, a critical distinction must be drawn between the concepts of precision and accuracy. Society often rewards the illusion of precision, the confident pundit who declares with absolute certainty that a stock will hit a specific, exact number by Tuesday. But in a probabilistic world, absolute precision is almost always a mask for profound inaccuracy. True strategic accuracy requires the humility to express our forecasts in ranges. Stating that an event has a broad estimated likelihood between 40 and 60% may sound less authoritative than declaring a definitive outcome, but it is infinitely more aligned with the truth of a volatile universe. We must learn to tolerate the discomfort of broad ranges and rough estimates, recognizing that it is far superior to be accurately uncertain than to be precisely, confidently wrong. Embracing this nuance protects our capital and our cognitive frameworks from the inevitable variance of life. Ultimately, the arduous journey of recalibrating our minds, dismantling our biases, and embracing the cold mathematics of probability is not merely an academic exercise. It is a profound, continuous wager placed on our own evolution. Every time we pause to analyze a past mistake without ego, every time we recruit a dissenting voice to shatter our illusions, And every time we map the future as a spectrum of probabilities rather than a rigid certainty, we are actively betting on our better selves. We are choosing the painful, necessary discipline of the present over the comfortable, destructive delusions of the past. It is a commitment to the belief that while we can never entirely eliminate the chaotic influence of luck, we can absolutely master the mechanics of our own choices. By dedicating ourselves to this relentless pursuit of objective truth, we build an intellectual armor that allows us to walk into the fog of the unknown not with fear, but with the quiet, unshakable confidence of a mind uniquely prepared for whatever cards the universe decides to deal.